went down to that river, washed my sins away. Praying, 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 praying for another day. I went down to that river, washed my sins for free. The devil's on me.
Gentlemen, welcome back to episode 5 of the Nitty Gritty podcast. I'm your host, Mac Thomas, and today we're going to be talking about one thing and one thing only, and it kind of goes into the title of this episode. So this man has 297 on-field wins with a record of 297-71. He has 206 wins at Alabama, 7 total national championships, 128 consecutive weeks rated in the Associated Press top 10, and he's had 21 coaches that have had head jobs at the FBS level, including 6 that are currently head coaches at Power 5 schools. The man I'm referencing is Nick Saban. And a lot of people think Nick Saban's a go, and he's this, and he's that. But Nick Saban to me represents a couple of different things. First, in terms of determination and grit, I don't know if any other coach defines that more than him. From this perspective, rather. Year in and year out, there's often the comparison of a football family versus a football factory. And Alabama, well, it's not a good or bad thing. They're a football factory. You go into there, your chances of increasing and going to the NFL, or whether you're a coach, going to another job at a different place, increase drastically if you go to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And we can talk about all Saban's achievements and everything that he's done, but I want to talk about 3 things, really. I want to talk about why Saban left, what's the immediate impact of him leaving, and what him leaving has to do with the legacy for the sport moving forward. And so kind of to start of why Saban left. In a recent interview, he talked about how he had 70 to 80% of the players after they lost a Rose Bowl essentially asked him, like, hey, what's my playing time going to be? What's my guaranteed playing time going to be? And then also, how much money am I going to get, rather, for doing this? And it's something with Saban that I feel like disrupts his system, in the sense of Saban's system is more or less, it's the unit rather than the individual. No one individual can elevate the team to a position where they can win. His motto has always been very much team first, team first, team first. And especially now with the transfer portal and stuff like that, because even as soon as he left, you had 50, 60% of the roster just getting up and leaving without giving Kalen DeBoer a new chance to kind of introduce himself and get his set program established. But like I said, the incentive or the players thinking like, hey, especially going against Nick Saban's philosophy of hey, you're coming to this university to play football and that's it. I feel like almost that message almost got skewed in a sense of, now you have guys coming in, and usually those end of the season meetings are more or less rather discuss performance and how the year went and what are your expectations for next year. And that's how it's been for all of Saban's career. Talking about, hey, how can you improve and how can we get you to this next level, which is something that he has gone great at. Great. I don't know if any other coach has more players drafted all time than Saban. And if he's not number 1, he's definitely in the top 3. But also, too, I think it's important to note that, once you have a certain set way, especially for a guy like him, from West Virginia, so he has that very much ingrained Southern morals, kind of he's not going to change his morals for whatever he's doing. He can adapt somewhat, and he did adapt to this new era of college football, even winning a national championship, in my opinion, in the new era of college football with the introduction of NIL and the transfer portal. But especially from this past season, with just how it went, funnily enough, I think this past season was Saban's best coaching job. Because think about this. This was the 1 year, I believe it's the first time that Tuscaloosa lost Alabama lost in Tuscaloosa since 2019. LSU went in there and beat them, and we're talking a historically great team that went in there and did that, and they got out of there barely by an absolute. The hairs on their head. They barely escaped Tuscaloosa. And so now when Texas came in and then won that, especially in Tuscaloosa, I feel like it almost gave this like shot to the head of Bama fans. And I think Saban too, of like, oh crap. Yeah, the old ways of Alabama kind of going through and us kind of beating the crap out of everyone, it's kind of done. Like, we can't just out physical and out athletic anyone anymore. I'm not even saying that's what they did their entire life. Like, Alabama schematically and discipline wise has been one of the most disciplined teams in the country. And in terms of running your scheme too, like they run it to perfection often. Like with the results, 6 national championships in his time as Tuscaloosa. But especially with this new era, the fact of and this is kind of something to go along with it, but like, whenever him asking a player of like, hey, you need to do this, rather than the player saying yes, coach, or yes, sir, it's why. And that entire like statement, right, that entire like response almost goes entirely against Saban's philosophy of, hey, we are team first. We are team oriented. No individual is bigger than the team, no matter if they win the Heisman Trophy, no matter if they're an All-American, team first. And when you have all this transition happening and all this stuff like this year, I mean, crap, 3rd game into the year or whatever game it was against USF, they benched Milroe, their starting quarterback, who got them to a playoff game. They benched him and said, nah, like, we're good. We're going to try someone else out. Granted, did he come back and respond? Yes. But imagine telling that to Saban in the beginning of the year. Like, hey, Saban, you're going to have to bench your starting quarterback in week 3 just to see if, he's the guy potentially. And especially the way that offensively they ran this year, was just like, it was very, very different. It was almost like an old school Alabama team to where the past 4 or 5 years, they've had just such incredible wide receiver and quarterback talent. And this year they almost had to go back to the old school Alabama, like we're going to line up in 21 personnel and we're just going to hammer the ball the entire time. And we're just going to run the ball the entire time. They went back to that, but also in a sense too, like, that's not what Bama traditionally has been. Like I said, in these past couple of years, they kind of got away from it. And not that they got exposed in a sense, but Bryce Young very well have held Alabama together these past 2 years. Especially when you look at the talent like this season, granted, was it enough to get them to a CFP playoff and all that stuff? Yes. But it just felt like they were just walking on eggshells the entire time. Like, it was just, like, weird. Like, they didn't have that Alabama confidence where it's like, hey, we're Alabama, we're going to go out and win every week. Like, you just didn't feel that. You almost held your breath every week as, like, even as an Alabama fan or not Alabama fan, like, oh, this team may or may not lose this week, depending on who they're playing. And granted, did they have some good wins? Yes. They did beat LSU. They beat 1 or 2 other ranked teams at the same time. And they also, were within one play of potentially beating Michigan and winning the national championship, or at least getting to the national championship. So now that I've kind of set the why Saban, decided to choose, I feel like it's important also to talk about the immediate impact that happens with him leaving. So just to start, Saban retires. 3 days later, Kalen DeBoer of the Washington Huskies, who got to the national championship game, is then hired as the new Alabama head coach. You then have Jedd Fisch of Arizona leaving to go to Washington. So right there, you immediately have 3 programs affected just by Saban retiring. Alabama with Saban retiring, the GOAT of all time, and you also have, DeBoer coming in with a brand new era. Not in the sense of they're getting away from the culture, what they do, but it's just a new era. Like, it's almost the same thing of New England, of like, how do you follow up Bill Belichick? Like, what can the expectations from the fans be, like, going forward to this next season? And I feel like, especially if you're a Bama fan, like, you have to keep it in perspective and reality of the following. The greatest college football coach of all time. And granted, Bear Bryant, you could have an argument, but in my opinion, the greatest head coach of all time has now more or less retired, and now that there's these expectations of like, oh, like what are we gonna do? How's next season gonna be? But I think that keeping perspective is just so important. Like if you're Bama fans, and especially this new SEC where you're playing Texas and Oklahoma, and I'm not saying that that's the end all be all, but with this new schedule, like, and especially like all the like with the conference realignment and all this different stuff happening, like if I'm a Bama fan next season, like granted the 12-team playoff does help them in terms of getting in, but like this has been the first year, I believe, since in the past 15 years that Alabama is not favored to win the SEC East, I believe, or West, rather, whatever division they're in. Think about that. The first time in 15 years they're not favored to win their own division. That more or less to me symbolizes like what Coach Saban has kind of more or less brought to this program and done. It really is something to where like he's brought so much stability into this program, and he brought life into it also to where he got them back to where they needed to be. Alabama before in the early 2000s, granted, he had the one loss to Louisiana Lafayette, but at the same time, though, of just keeping perspective of the GOAT just retired. Like, not that you can't expect to win a national championship with DeBoer, because he literally got a team to the national championship last season, but like, this is a brand new era in Tuscaloosa. Like, Saban's gone. Granted, you still have your starting quarterback coming back, which is good. But a lot of the guys, like Caleb Downs transferring to Ohio State, or just like a lot of the marquee guys just leaving, like, if you're an Alabama fan, you cannot have that thought or perspective going to the next season. Like, oh, like, it's still going to be the same. We're going to do all these things. Like, it could look completely different. And I expect it to look different, too. Especially with the offense I'm going to assume that DeBoer's bringing in. Not that it will suit Milroe, but there's going to be growing pains. And any fan there is going to be like, oh, no, like, we're still going to be Alabama. And, like, you're delusional. You're absolutely delusional. Because can he get them back to where they are and winning national championships, in my opinion? Yes. DeBoer can do that. In my opinion, who would have been the one guy that I would have said, we want him, and he's the only person we'll take, and we will shovel out literally $150 million over the course of, 3 to 4 years for? It would have been Dabo. Because at the end of the day, what matters in this sport is winning. And winning national championships is the ultimate prize. And what are the only really 5 to 6 guys that have done that? Or even like 3 to 4 really consistently? Kirby, Dabo, Saban. Outside of that, no one. So I think it's a point to keep in mind going into this next season. I'm like, hey, you get Alabama fans, you cannot lose your minds in the first week or, God forbid, the third week when, say, like, even in the year when if you have like 3 losses, it's like you never know. You still could get into the playoff. But I think that keeping that perspective is just super important in terms of like for the whole season. Because the one thing you don't want, in my opinion, as an Alabama fan, is to put all the pressure then on DeBoer of, say, God forbid, they don't eclipse a double-digit win season, a 10-win season this year, of like, oh, we need to fire this guy, da-da-da-da, and bringing out all this old SEC coach mantra. Like I talked about in a previous episode, the average stay for a coach in the SEC for each program, 4 years. 4 years. And at least a potential problem I could be seeing, especially for a school like Alabama, and kind of goes along the same line as LSU of like, hey, if you're not getting us to at least a chance to win a national championship, we don't want you. When they're not considering the variability there is within each year of college football. Because, God forbid, your starting quarterback gets injured or whatever happens, like, you could be screwed for the entire season. And I think it's important for Alabama fans to realize, like, listen, like, DeBoer's a great coach, I think. He's a great coach. But also keep in perspective, like, we had the greatest coach of all time just retire. And looking towards the future, I feel like it's something that needs to be understood. But yeah, we're taking a quick break, and we'll be right back with the other half of the episode from the Nitty Gritty podcast. Welcome back to the Nitty Gritty podcast, folks. And kind of just to close out the episode, so we kind of talked about already the football side of, like, what's happening with Nick Saban retiring, and like what that means to the sport more or less. But I feel like, at least personally to me, I should kind of mention like what this man has kind of like meant to me. I've never been an Alabama fan. I've never claimed to been. My entire life, it's almost in a sense of, especially as a Notre Dame fan, like you almost resent the amount of success that Alabama has had. It's something to where, like, every time you turn on TV or at the end of the year when it's Saban and Alabama standing up there with a trophy, it kind of more or less like, just like, what the heck? Like, sucks for everyone else. But there's certain times, though, where you look back, and I think especially now when it's like, you look back on certain things and you realize, like, how great it was to have. And did people complain about it? Yes. Were people upset about it? Yes. But what Nick Saban did at Alabama, I'm not sure that it'll ever be replicated in terms of the culture that he established, and one that I kind of like follow, of, valuing hard work and discipline more than anything else. And also just like being able to, at the same time, while being a coach and being that leader of men, being able to relate to the athletes too. And I feel like that's something to where with him that is just not talked about enough. You always hear about his former players talking about, like, oh, how, like, Saban was a jokester and stuff like that. And, like, he would have fun with the guys, like, in the sense of, like, he know how to joke and, keep stuff lively. But also, at the end of the day, like, he was about work. And especially in this kind of newer era of, like, the instant gratification and people wanting things just instantly all the time, I feel like it's something that's just not appreciated enough. And especially when I look back on all the years that Alabama won and stuff like that, it's, you resent and you kind of say, like, oh, like, I hate that they won the national championship that year, or they did this or did that. But I also think it's important that it's recognized too, as saying, like, this is a great man who had a great impact on the kids and the people that he was around. Like, great example of that would be Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin, he talks about it, but like him, his struggles with, like, alcoholism and more or less just, like, being not mentally right. And then once he got with Saban, granted, was there pressure? Yes. But it also evolved Kiffin as a person to where he was able to get to the point now where where the Ole Miss Rebels now are, for the first time in God knows how long, like, have essentially set themselves up for a chance to win the SEC. And that's something that hasn't been said outside of Tuscaloosa for a while now, besides Athens, Georgia. But yeah, Nick Saban, all I really like to say to you is thank you as a fan. Thank you for the memories. Thank you for the moments. Thank you for more or less keeping it real, and especially in this world of fake stuff and, instant gratification and people wanting things now rather than later. Thank you for keeping the idea of, like, hard work. Like, if you work at something long enough and hard enough, like, eventually you can reach that end goal. And also pick up lessons of discipline and, grit along the way. And having the ability to overcome and adapt whatever situation you're put into. And just be able to, like, more or less kind of do whatever your end goal is. Whether that's make it to the NFL and being the greatest year position of all time, or just simply trying to make it in life. And I feel like Saban really embodies that in terms of getting the best out of what he's presented. Granted, is he usually getting the best in terms of recruiting cycles? Yes. But it's not necessarily about the player you get. It's about what you turn them into. And Saban, 99% of the time, has done right by the player and made sure that, that whatever field they're going to go into, whether it's, being an academic field, like being a doctor, lawyer, or being a professional football player, Saban gives his, at least not now, but Saban gave every second of every day, like, and you can even see him talk about, like, in his retirement speech a little bit, or like some of the quotes that would come out, like, he doesn't spend, like, a weekend or, like, whatever with his kids, or, like, just, like, living a normal life in so long, because the football players that he has are his family. And especially when you're a guy like him, like, once you're involved in something, you're doing it 100%. Like, there's no 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It's, hey, if I'm here and if I'm in the University of Alabama football facilities, I'm giving my 100% to these players, these coaches, this football staff, and because that's the only way I know. And in order for us to get to where we need to be, I'm going to do it my way. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. But at the end of the day, we're going to set ourselves up for a chance to win a national championship. And I think that's something that is not appreciated enough about him, because all the athletic achievements and all the coaching achievements that he's done are great. But I think the thing that most people need to realize is that, like, while Saban was an absolute just player builder, and he can make stars out of not nothing, but stars out of essentially already stars, yes. But also his impact of just like teaching discipline, hard work, and just that never give in attitude. And the also not feeling a sense of entitlement because we go to University of Alabama. And actually, if anything, it's going to be harder when you come here than anywhere else, because if you can get through this here, you can do this anywhere, and including in the NFL. Because you always hear about how Alabama players talk about, oh, like, I get to the NFL, and it's like, man, I have all this free time. And it's because that Saban cares so much about whatever he's doing. His player, like I said, his players, his coaching staff, the support staff around football, that he never could really have that balance of like going home and just being like, hey, honey, how was work today? It was just football always on his mind. And as a fan of the sport since I was 5, 6 years old, I think it's something to say where we should all be thanking Saban. We really should. For the memories, for the good and the bad, for the quotes. He truly embodied what it meant to be not only a great football coach, but also a great person and a great man. Thank you for watching episode 5 of the Nitty Gritty podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.